Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Farr, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this show on February 7, 2025. It is day 1080 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. But it's Ukraine's invasion of Russia that Chuck and I are going to look at first, because the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk has come back alive in a very big way, Chuck.
Yeah, it absolutely has. Alan and I were just looking at the latest map here, which is 1450 UTC, 7 February, which remarkably, Alan, is today, because the days are so long, I don't even remember when the maps get made. If you're listening and you don't have access to the map, no worries. Sudza is the largest Russian town that Ukraine has taken in its salient north into Kursk. The Ukrainian zone of control roughly looks like an outline of the nation of India. It's not nearly that big. In total, it's something north of 400 square kilometers. But what has happened in the last, I'd say, 24 to 36 hours, a large multi-battalion sortie of Ukrainian forces operating in battalion-sized formations, meaning multiple companies operating in support of each other, the way the Russians no longer seem capable of doing. It has attacked southeast on an axis roughly contiguous to the 38K 028 highway, and they have advanced, at last report, Alan, somewhere between 5 and 10 kilometers. Pretty impressive stuff.
Very impressive, and just looking at the incursion as a kind of clock face, it's interesting that the Ukrainians are attacking down here towards Ulyanovsk, considering that the Russians had been attacking to the west towards Sverdlikovo, and that is where Ukraine inflicted so many casualties on the North Korean troops who were fighting with the Russians, and inflicted so many casualties on the Russians themselves that the Russians appear to have paused that attack on the western side of the blob.
Yeah, and that is, there is another factor in warfare besides mass unity of command, that blah, blah, blah. There is momentum, right? And that is getting something started, just simple Newtonian physics. Once you get something started, it'll keep rolling. But when you have to stop something and restart it, you pay a penalty, and especially in warfare. So here's the predicament that the Russian commanders find themselves in, and for them, this is an insurmountable intellectual challenge, Alan. Their attacks in the West have gone badly. They were utterly surprised by this Ukrainian thrust southeast out of Sudza. How do we know that the Russians were taken napping? Well, these are from the north. The Ukrainians have advanced, and they have taken a crescent of little towns on the way to Ulyanovsk. This is from Vijesty 111. If you don't follow him, folks, I'm telling you, he's the secret sauce that Alan and I have been using for years. He has the best information. It comes out first, and he is not wrong. I'll leave it to your own imaginations, whether he's the Wizard of Oz or he knows what he's talking about. So the town of Kolomakov is taken. The town of Kolinpelika is taken. The town of Kurlikovka is also taken. And the last of these, Fanasisivka, is within stone's throw of Ulyanovsk itself. All of these, of course, this attack is based upon the 38K 028 highway, which doesn't mean that's where all the traffic is. That's what the Russians do. This is a wedge. This is multiple companies operating in concert, mutually supporting. They have made a wedge and they are driving forward, which is how you command a battalion, Alan. Remarkably, that's how it's actually done.
Well, the Russians have had about 60,000 odd troops in Kursk to throw the Ukrainians out. We know that the North Korean troops supporting the Russians have probably been withdrawn from the front line, even though there's still conflicting news about that. They're certainly not launching these bayonet charges across snowy fields. The Russians themselves have been manhandled by the Ukrainians in Kursk, suffering perhaps as many as 15,000 casualties, losing dozens of tanks. You know, this is proof that Ukraine is going to hold on to Kursk for the near future, the long term. Who knows?
Yeah, they are definitely not leaving before spring, and I don't think they're leaving then. If you do have the map and you're referring to it again, the city of Sudza is the center of gravity of the Ukrainian holdings. Early in this incursion, the game was up for Russia when they abandoned Sudza essentially without a fight.
Yeah.
I mean, they skedaddled. And they skedaddled for a couple of reasons. This was the rear. As far as the Russians were concerned, they had their least well-trained, their sleepiest soldiers, their most idiotic commanders were there. Ukraine, as it advanced, it did so with two remarkable components that were overweighted. They came with a lot of combat engineering troops, and they came with a lot of special operations forces, battalion level special operations groups. They were able to wreak havoc, miles ahead of the zero line, and with the engineers consolidating ground lines of communication and supply and making hard points, defensive points all through this area. You look at it this way. Putin thought that he would inject the fresh blood of determined Marxist-Leninist cadres, North Koreans who will fight till the bitter end. And let's say they got manhandled too.
Yeah.
38 to 40% casualties. It's not surprising they've been withdrawn from the battle line, and at least for their own safety.
Yeah. It's interesting. Ukraine back in August, when they launched this incursion, they did take Russia completely by surprise. But now, in this new attack towards Ulyanok, again, they've taken Russia completely by surprise. And this maneuver is coming straight out of Sudza. What is the problem with Russian intelligence and reconnaissance? This is inside Russia.
They have a really long Udala loop, right? They have a really long loop. Here's the threat. I recognize it. I quantify it. Here's where it is. Here's where it's possibly coming. And I will make a decision how to react. It takes an incredibly long time to do it. And the other thing is, look, they have a talent problem, right? They really do. They've got a talent problem. If you are a major or above in the Russian army, you don't read the army proceedings. You don't flip through the battle manuals. You never had to. This is all about selling the engines and the overcoats and the everything else in your depots. You aren't a warrior. You are not a war fighter. And so they've also got to the point, and we've talked about this. We see it's symptomatic of this disintegrating Russian army that all they can do is mount pinprick attacks. That's all they can do. Any other military evolutions that are more complicated, like fire and movement or fire and maneuver, they're not so good at it. Now, when it comes to like this, and we have been talking about this forever, here we have an example of Ukrainian troops linked together, doing it by the book, on the offensive. And what's happening, Alan? The Russians are falling back in utter disarray. No surprise.
No surprise whatsoever in Kursk. And again, part of what is enabling Ukraine to do this is how they have used drones and electronic warfare in Kursk. It was in Kursk that we learned how successful Ukraine had been at jamming Russian drones, especially important to jam those reconnaissance drones. In a way, Ukraine pulls the wool over the Russians' eyes, so to speak. Every time they take out a radar on the battlefield, every time they come up with new electronic warfare, then Ukraine is essentially able to conceal from the Russians what it's doing.
Right, and you have some numbers here and about recent Russian artillery losses, and I think they may be correlative to what's going on here south of Sudza. So why don't you run us through those numbers?
Well, there's a 7-day record of 340 artillery pieces reported by Ragnar Gudmundsson, the Icelandic data specialist.
Absolutely. A stud.
He's just spectacular. Another person, if you want the real news from Ukraine, follow his data and his dashboard. So that is a record for the war. 340 artillery pieces taken out in the last 7 days, not all in Kursk, but a substantial number in Pokrovsk as well. And we're going to get to Pokrovsk. Look, the number of engagements are going down. Only 100 today all across the zero line. And again, at least a quarter or a third of those in Pokrovsk. When the number of engagements goes down, the Russian casualties go down, only 1,340 today. So nowhere near even the 1,500 average daily casualties of Russia. But that's going to lead us to some interesting questions we'll be asking when we get to Pokrovsk, Chuck.
Yeah, and even so some of those 300 artillery pieces certainly were taken out in Kursk, in operations contiguous to Kursk. Artillery is the king or queen, it's often said, of battle. It is the principal offensive arm of Soviet and Russian troops, and I think with this uptick in numbers, I would not be surprised that, before Ukraine embarks on any sort of offensive actions, we talked about this previously, the preconditions must be met, right? So you must be able to account for the enemy's artillery locations. You must be ready to engage them with counter battery fire and ideally smother them all in italics and underlined before you start moving your troops. That apparently is what's happening here around Sudza. Do I know that? You wouldn't be able to move multi-battalion sized formations unless you had created a permissive artillery environment. And again, this is Ukraine doing their damn homework, because it is this kind of warfare that's going to win the war. Right? It's ground maneuver warfare, not your platoon and one other platoon attacking 4 kilometers apart against Pokrovsk. That, as they say on Jeopardy, thanks for playing. This is how it's done. And they're doing it. No surprise.
Yeah. The other thing, artillery actually causes most of the casualties in battle. Because Ukraine has been outgunned by Russia from the beginning of this war, I doubt very much if it's Ukrainian artillery inflicting the majority of casualties on Russians. And this is where these meat wave attacks come in. I mean, Ukrainian soldiers actually saying, you know, I, I'm tired of killing so many Russians. The Russians are literally uh, approaching Ukrainian defensive lines, and it's individual Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian drones that are inflicting these massive casualties on Russia.
Yeah, and so in a traditional battle, and this is history. Okay, all the things I'm talking about right now, ground warfare doctrine, that's history. This is the war, folks, that changed everything. Everything I'm saying is what boomer geezers say. Okay, traditionally, you would bring up your artillery so you could smother the enemy's artillery so that you can have large scale maneuver warfare. 1,000 days ago, Ukraine invented a new thing, a flying robot that a 17-year-old kid will put right on an artillery piece. So Ukraine does not have artillery parity with the Russians. They may never, but they've got drones and they've got technique and they've got tactics, and they are taking out these artillery pieces. And just before we went on, Alan and I were also talking, there's one other factor that contributes to this 300 and what was it, 50 artillery pieces?
340.
Take They're about 340. Here's a problem. You are a crafty old artillery master sergeant. You didn't get to be crafty and old and a master sergeant by being a chump. You camouflaged your piece every night. You cut down the bushes. You did all the work. You dug the trenches. You put up the camouflage nets. And by God, you move that piece every day. Sometimes you move that piece, 4 times a day. That's how you get old. Here's how you contribute to 340 artillery pieces in 1 week. You are lazy. You don't camouflage your unit. You stack your ammunition up chest high right next to the piece. You camp out with a campfire within spitting distance of your gun. All of these little things, Alan, they draw great big bullseyes around these pieces. One little thing, right? So something goes on in one supporting combat arm. Look at Sudza.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, folks, they are not done rolling. They're not done rolling.
Right. And Ukraine has seen a great opportunity to keep going in Kursk. And, I'm not saying that Ukrainian artillery doesn't inflict casualties on the Russians. Of course it does. And, we've seen what HIMARS can do. But we do know that Russia has had, in some cases, a 20-1 artillery advantage. It's down under 10 now because Ukraine has been so successful with their counter battery fire, which they had to be very efficient with because they had so few artillery pieces compared to the Russians, but also because Ukraine is the leader in drone warfare. It's their drones that are destroying all this Russian equipment on the battlefield.
Right. And we're going to see that from now on. 50 years from now, there will still be artillery. There will still be main battle tanks. That isn't going to change. But right now, it takes a very expensive Excalibur shell, 155 millimeter shell that flies to a GPS coordinate. Or it takes a not so expensive, but definitely the cost of a new house or most of a new house, a copperhead round, which back in my day, this was the shit. Put a laser on the target and it flew to the laser. And Ukraine is using those things. They don't use them for fire support. They use them for high value targets, which feeds into this other thing. Ukraine's tactical intelligence, their battlefield intelligence, their situational awareness within an area of operation is stellar. They just took out another battalion level headquarters element within the last 24 hours. I can't remember the name of the unit, May their names never be spoken here, but they took out the colonel, the lieutenant colonel, the majors, the entire staff.
Yeah.
And it isn't just taking the pitcher off the mound. That's taking the whole team out of the dugout. So bravo, Zulu, Ukrainian gunners.
Yeah. Well, there's so much news coming today from Kursk, but also from Pokrovsk. We should move to the Pokrovsk maps, and there are two that we can look at together. One from today, February 7, one from February 5th. The February 7 map today, Chuck, really shows you the expanse pretty much of the entire battle area up to the Pokrovsk axis. So you can actually see Kurakova at the very south, Pokrovsk at the very north. Now, Zelensky reporting about the massive casualties that Russia has suffered just to approach Pokrovsk. And even in Pokrovsk, we've seen the number of Russian attacks fall in the last week. And I'm beginning to wonder about the culmination of Russian forces. Is that me being too optimistic?
Great minds think alike. So next week, Monday, Tuesday, maybe, I just did another special report for the Kyiv Post in the Point of Impact series. And the overarching, storyline is, what are Russian casualties to date? How many killed? What are their material losses look like? I won't bore you with the numbers, but when we talk about culmination, you send a unit to the front and it fights and it loses people and vehicles and certain things. And generally, by the time you've lost half, is when they're definitely going to pull a NATO unit back, and you're probably going to get a new commander as well. Russia keeps their units there until there's nothing left. You'll see 5 guys standing around with a Russian cell phone saying, "We are what's left of the 750th Storm Battalion of the 1st Guards Motor Rifle Division." Okay, there's a battalion and you got 7 guys left. Okay, well, how bad are the losses? This is not an exaggeration. Russia has lost more tanks than the sum total of all main battle tanks owned by NATO in Europe, continental powers in NATO. They've lost 15 times that many tanks. Not all of the tanks plus 15 times. So they're right almost at 20,000 main battle tanks. And given that they started this war with a 1983 plan, armor to the front, mechanized infantry to follow, hey, look, that was a decent plan in the 80s. That was the plan that NATO thought, we are going to fight back to the beaches of Normandy and start all over from England. That's the threat that the Soviet Union posed. Do they pose that now? Are they capable of doing those things now? No, Alan, they are not. We could be seeing the culmination here in this Pokrovsk map. And I'll just remind everybody, one of the reasons we put this up, this is an older projection, obviously, but you can see all the territory between Avdiivka and Pokrovsk. Once Avdiivka fell, this was the inevitable result. Mistakes were made, right? There was not defense in depth. The Russians actually gobbled this up pretty fast for them, although it took a year and a half. But there we go. This may be as high as they go. We'll see.
Yeah, the speed that the Russians moved out of Avdiivka was alarming a few weeks ago. But the success that Ukraine has had, not only in making Pokrovsk a fortress well defended, but in slowing down the Russian advance, I think gives Ukraine some advantages right now. I also wonder, what problems does Russia face in this Pokrovsk sector? in supplying the Russian troops at the front. The logistics here don't look too simple to me.
No, they're not. You've got the M30 highway, which goes from Avdiivka, meanders around and heads towards Kursk. Um, Within 10 kilometers of the zero line, you have got a pretty high density of Ukrainian drones, and they will hit anything that's moving. There was a priority pyramid of targets. Armored vehicles, logistical vehicles, but there isn't a single Ukrainian drone. Generally, they do cycle back. It's possible to do that, but generally, the Russians present such a target-rich environment that every FPV drone will at least make an attack on something. Sometimes it's an individual rifleman, but that's not the most lucrative thing for you to hit with your drone. And this is part of the problem. It's one thing to stage an attack. It's another thing to reach the objective. It's another thing to hold the objective. It's another thing to resupply the objective. And it's another thing to move on. And think of it as this rubber band. And the more and the more and the more you stretch it, literally, it is under tension. And if something goes wrong, like we always say, an army is like an electric lawnmower, right? It's got to have a plug. Without the plug. So one of the other problems is Russia combed through their logistical ranks 2 years ago, saying we got too many truck drivers. We don't need you guys. We don't need logisticians. We need riflemen. You get out of the truck. Here's your rifle. Go. Logistics is being a supply officer, that's a military occupational specialty. And how's it doing for them? Well, you've seen the golf carts. You've seen the stolen civilian vehicles. And lately, and I'm not kidding, folks, they're using donkeys.
Yeah.
So a pretty reliable, actually, piece of equipment, but not quite for this war.
Well, donkeys are reliable if you feed them. I wonder if Russia is even able to feed its own troops in some places along the zero line. And the other thing that makes me think about the Russian forces culminating is the report of Russian wounded actually being taken out of the hospitals and returned to the zero line. These are not malingerers. These are soldiers recovering from wounds. They're not fully recovered. And we've seen the soldiers on crutches limping into battle. Russia must face a pretty terrible shortage on the zero line right now, even though, they have this vaunted mobilization program going on back in Russia. They're putting in the worst performing troops they possibly could.
Well, and you get to the why. Why would you troll through a military hospital and take a guy on crutches and send him to the battle line? I saw another piece of video, 2 Russian soldiers getting out of a position. And look, fair play to them, right? Guy on crutches, he actually was in the lead. The other guy, and as a mortar rounds are coming in, I'm just looking at this guy. He has abdominal wounds. He just could not walk. He could only put one step in front of the other. So is this because the Russians are simply barbaric? Is this to provide examples for the encouragement of the others? No, it's because they're running out of people. And they're running out of people. I'm predicting something that's going to happen in the future, and this has happened 1 or 2 times already. There is going to be a riot and a massacre at a Russian military hospital when these soldiers finally stand up and say, no, we're not doing it. We are not doing it. And remember, those of you who remember the days of the Bolsheviks, it was disaffected members of Russia's armed forces, army and navy, who rode in on the Russian Revolution. And military defeat is the handmaiden of political change in Russia. One glorious day, folks. It's coming. History will repeat itself. Absolutely.
Yeah. Excuse me. It is coming. And you never know when that day is going to be. And you cannot pick up enough clues from the zero line to say, wait until you see what happens next Thursday. It's not that kind of collapse, but I actually think in Pokrovsk itself, the Ukrainians have inflicted so many Russian casualties here, destroyed so much Russian equipment, and I do think it's problematic for Russia to adequately supply its zero line around Pokrovsk. I think this is a logical place to look for such a collapse in the Russian forces.
It really could happen. And again, cast our eyes north and we'll try out this hypothesis. You have a Ukrainian offensive now pushing southeast out of Sudza. Alan and I talk about all the time. The easiest thing to do is to get 5-year mates, fix your bayonets, point towards the enemy and attack. That is as easy as it gets. The hardest thing to get is Alan waking me up in the trench and saying, everyone else is dead. There's 40 of them. They're coming right at us. Fire a couple of magazines, fall back to a tree, fire more. Alan goes to the next tree. I go to the next. An officer stands up at the crossroad, fires his pistol in the air, says, everybody on me. That's the hardest thing there is to do in the military period. And tired, starving, disaffected, screwed over Russian soldiers, they're not going to rally on that officer. They're going to run. And they're running right now in Kursk.
Yeah.
We'll see. This is the Brewer-Farr hypothesis right here, up there in Kursk. Let's see how these guys do against oncoming Ukrainian offensive action. I'm predicting Ulanok by Monday.
I bet by Sunday.
I bet by Sunday. I said Monday. I thought they might be a little farther than that. So, but we'll see. Keep your eye on there, folks, and that's what you're going to see.
The other thing that I think will contribute to real Russian problems in Pokrovsk is what the Russian soldiers will have to be asked to do. I don't think it's clear yet if the Russian command has made up its mind to go around Pokrovsk, even though we've seen attacks down in Kudry to the southwest. We've seen other attacks to the east of Moskovsky. But when you look at the February 5th map, Chuck, and you look at how complex the Pokrovsk urban area is, I don't think the Russians are up to such an urban battle.
No, I don't think so either. That there is the other thing, and it is the manner in which Russia it engages in urban combat. They will push and push and push. And the Battle of Severodonetsk, which was 2 years ago, was exactly this. And we happened to map that battle literally street by street from the very beginning. The Russians were first able to get into an elementary school that was next to some woods. And they took a couple of buildings. And they kept just pouring Russians into the city. And the Ukrainians staged a fake withdrawal. And the Russians put even more people in, and they sprang the trap on them. And that battle went on for about 4 weeks in the city of Severodonetsk. They mauled the Russians. And then the Ukrainians withdrew for real and withdrew almost 15 kilometers. Not a single Russian soldier followed them. they had culminated. And when you are throwing just numbers, not even, there's a reason why you're lined up in a squad and you count off 1, 2, 3, 4. Everyone's in that squad. They know who the boss is, who's the fire team leader, who's the second fire team leader. But if you just have busloads of idiots with rifles thrown in there, who's in charge? Nobody knows. So we saw in Pokrovsk, and rather in Severodonetsk, there was no reason that the Ukrainians should have been able to break contact in the city and steal away with 1 or 2 battalions of people without anyone firing a shot at them.
Yeah.
Because nobody gave a damn on the Russian side. They didn't give a damn. We'll see it here. We'll see this happen. We'll see the Russians not giving a damn up in Kursk. But Alan, you may be right. Maybe it's too early to make this call in Pokrovsk, but look, I'm with you. The symptoms, they're all there. They are all there.
Of course, I mean, the other thing that runs through my head when, especially, I see the fall of daily engagements reported, as I say, it's 101 today. It was 89 the other day. Very rarely do you see the number of engagements fall under 100, especially when you consider that in December we had some days with over 200 engagements reported. So, when the engagements drop, the other thing I think, well, what else could Russia be up to? Do they have reserve forces in Tokmak or Melitopol that they could distribute where needed along the zero line? I don't know. My first thought is the drop of daily battle engagements is a sign of Russian culmination.
It could be. They are cyclical, these engagements. You and I have, we've noted that before. A lot of times I will take advantage of if a sector gets quiet, which happens, I don't know, every 5 to 7 days. I'll almost always try to map it, because with all the battle icons, sometimes you can lose it. But Russia is going to lose this war as long as they keep fighting it the way they are now. You get a battalion of people and you fight it 1 platoon at a time. And remember, every time they come in contact with Ukrainians, they lose between 35 and 85%. That's the bell curve. But there are times when they succeed, not very often, and there are times when they are wholly and completely annihilated, killed to the last person.
Yeah.
And look, that isn't the way you fight a battalion, right? A battalion is a component of a brigade task group. It operates and moves and covers, and I won't even go into it. But you had to pay attention in postgraduate school, right? You had to go to command and staff college. You had to go to the war college after that. It's a profession, right? Not with this officer corps. And they're never going to turn that around, Alan. This is a generational problem.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to turn it around. They're going to lose this war.
They'll find a way. They can't lose it soon enough, of course. I mean,
no.
I do really wish that Ukraine's allies had fully armed the 10 brigades that they promised they would arm, because I think that Ukraine would be in a much better position today, actually, to throw a big counterpunch somewhere on the zero line, even without air cover. It would be asking for a lot, but there are a lot of unique things Ukraine's been able to do with electronic warfare, especially to enable maneuver in Kursk, for example. And the other thing that Ukraine focuses on is taking out battlefield radar, taking out Russian air defense wherever they can find it. But especially on the battlefield as well. That allows Ukrainian drones to do even more of the work they're doing. I find Kursk a pretty interesting spot right now.
Yeah, and let me put forward the case for Russia not being able to win this war, right? First of all, they approached this war with a plan that had no scalability. They could not assess how big this problem would become. They thought it was going to be a 72-hour operation, right? In May, they will have lost 1 million people. 1 million people. In my Kiev Post article that's coming out, I come out with this hypothesis, and Alan and I have both talked about this. Russia is weaker now than it has ever been since World War II. There is no plan for them to win this war.
None.
No big Russian summer offensive is going to take Kiev. It isn't happening, folks.
No.
It won't happen next summer or the summer after that.
No. And stop and consider, Russia has 3 times as many troops in Ukraine today as it launched the invasion with in February 2022. I think they invaded with roughly 200,000 troops, Chuck. They now have 600,000 troops in Ukraine. So you can see how badly they did their math 3 years ago when they invaded. 600,000 troops in Ukraine to occupy about 18 or 20% of Ukrainian territory. And I don't think you're going to see Russia being the one holding on to all that territory. I think you are going to see Ukraine taking a lot of territory back early summer.
Yeah. And as far as the tankies are concerned, and some people whose media sources tell them this, they thought this was a very successful year, 2024, for the Russians. Well, they lost all 480,000 troops.
Yeah.
And they captured the size of Los Angeles City with some of the suburbs thrown in.
Yeah.
Right. They didn't even capture more than the Ventura Highway. Okay. They captured Los Angeles County. That's not winning.
No. We should also take a very quick look at Kherson, because for weeks now we have heard hints that the Russians are going to attempt to cross the Dnipro River and retake Kherson on the right bank. But so a lot of things have happened in Kherson to prevent the Russians from doing that. First of all, I don't think that the Russian soldiers who are going to get in those motorboats and cross, I think they have told their commanders, we don't swim. And who does swim? Special Forces of Ukraine. They launched a raid across the river that was, pretty daring.
Pretty daring and pretty good. They got to the little town of Hola Pristan, which is not just across the main part of the Dnipro, but across a couple of the tributaries as well. They got in there. It's a perfect raid. Get in, get out. They destroyed boats and motors. They were able to capture some things and persons of interest. Because remember, there's, you've got special forces and you husband that resource, right? You train those guys up so they can do special tasks. If you just need something blown up, you use a HIMARS. You send special forces in, especially guys who are going to have to swim. They have to do that unique human thing, right? Get into a building, sort out all the people, take the ones you want. Open the safe, take this, not take that. So there's so much more going on there than you hear. But to tell our listeners, look, if you hear about Ukrainian special forces operating and conducting a raid, bear that in mind. Those are the things that SEALs and Green Berets want to do. We're there to do a body snatch. We are their personnel interdiction. We are looking for a high value target. We are hitting a critical node. We're stealing some gizmo. We plant listening devices. There's just all kinds of things. And they did it. And that is look, the Russians are on guard there, right?
Yeah.
Which tells me a lot. This was a tough op in a denied area.
Other interesting thing is that the Ukrainian special forces were helped by partisans. This is exactly the kind of combination you would expect to see in occupied Ukraine. Ukrainian partisans are active everywhere, really, especially in Tokmak, Melitopol, but we've learned right here in Kherson.
Yeah, and I remember we did God, it was a couple of years ago. We did a whole show about special operations forces and the interface with partisans and how do you turn a patriot into a partisan? And maybe we'll do a show on that again. But developing those networks, right? You got an eager young Ukrainian patriot. You don't want him to waste his valor or his courage for no reason, right? So you organize them into cellular networks. You insert somebody who can run a network. You bring people in and out and you train them, and there's just a whole lot to it. There's definitely a whole show in that, Alan. Maybe one of these days we'll revisit that again. But good on the Ukrainians. Good on them.
Yeah. And we'll put that map up for this show as well. As I say, it was from February 5th. So I don't expect the Russians to cross the Dnipro anytime soon. Do you, Chuck?
No, I don't. And I can remember I was encouraging them to please mount an attack with your 300 motorboats. I can't think of anything more stupid, more wasteful, any Russian move that could be more certain of resulting in a catastrophe than that. But the fact that they even considered it, that it went to the point where they were stealing all the motorboats they could, and it really encourages me to see such invincible stupidity from the top.
Yeah.
It is completely encouraging to me. I didn't feel threatened. I didn't think, oh, we got to watch this. It's like, bring it on, you idiot.
Finally, today, we should mention that it appears next week at the Munich Defense Conference. The American Peace Plan will be unveiled. And it's also next week that President Trump says he will be meeting with President Zelensky. I don't know if this will be an in-person meeting in Washington or if it's just going to be a phone call. But it strikes me as important that that Trump and Zelensky will talk either before or after the American Peace Plan is unveiled in Munich. And it's not Trump and Putin talking before the American Peace Plan is unveiled in Munich. I don't think the leaked plan is the plan. So I wouldn't put much credibility in these reports that Trump is going to ask Ukraine to forever be neutral, to give up membership in NATO, to cede the territory it has lost so far to Russia. I don't think that is the peace plan. I really don't. If it is, you'll hear me scream.
Yeah, me too. And I wouldn't get so, I can't get all wrapped up around predicting what a completely unpredictable person is going to put forward. But, regardless of what the proposal is or is not, there will be some carrot and stick. And the first thing to do is lay the stick on the table. And that is like a global interdict on all of your shadow tankers.
Yeah.
All of them everywhere will be interned, everywhere globally throughout the world. And guess what? We've got the only Navy that can do that.
Yeah.
Do I have your attention? Okay, good. Because it's going to come with some conditions, and they could be get out of Crimea.
I don't know why not.
I don't know. How about, yeah, so and how about Crimea can't join NATO, but you can.
that
Okay.
that would be interesting. You know,
So I just wouldn't worry about, yeah. So I just don't want to ever get everyone worked up about that. And the one thing I'd say about the peace plan is Putin needs a peace plan. Ukraine doesn't need a peace plan, folks.
That's exactly right. Ukraine doesn't need to negotiate. And, it so happens that in Crimea, Russia has moved almost 1 million Russians into Crimea since it annexed Crimea in 2014. Well, that's one way to change the nature of a place. Just speaking of the Shadow Fleet, and then we will bring this program to a close. Denmark has taken a very strong step in addressing the sabotage that Russia has committed on undersea infrastructure in the Baltic and also, by the way, in the North Sea. And this was a number of years ago. The Russians were doing to undersea cables in the North Sea exactly what they're doing to undersea cables in the Baltic today. But Denmark is closing passage to Russian ships. No passage without inspection. That's my understanding.
Yeah, and wars in the UK, Great Britain fought a war against Denmark in the Napoleonic era, and it was because Denmark was controlling the straits of the Baltic. Denmark still controls the straits. They're very narrow there. They're only about 3 or 4 miles wide, much closer together than the Straits of Gibraltar. Denmark has been the traditional custodian of that, and I applaud them. There, a couple of these responses clicked it up a notch, right? When the Eagle S did its bad seamanship, it was Finland who sent a message, and it wasn't a blinking light. Please pull into Helsinki Harbor. We'd like to discuss this incident. No, it was Finnish naval commandos, right? Down the fast ropes onto the ship. And believe me, we don't go, hi, how you doing? Are you the captain? I'm Chuck Farr. I'm the assault element leader. How you doing? It's get on your face. Put your hands over your head, cross your legs. If you move again, I'm going to kill you. So, and the Finns said, look, this vessel is seized, it's embargoed, and we're going to sell the cargo to pay for this.
Yeah.
The press shrugged that off, but the means is the message. And Denmark now is doing the same thing. Looks bad for Russia, and it is.
Yeah. I think this underlines the unpredictability of where things stand right now. It's unpredictable on the zero line, quite frankly. It's unpredictable in the world of diplomacy. It's unpredictable in the world of sanctions and these actions that Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and the Baltic nations are taking up in the Baltic. And because it's so unpredictable, Chuck and I will be back next week with more maps, more analysis, less speculation. But today here on day 1080 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine, I hope Chuck and I have given you a quick update of where everything stands right now. And I know you'll all want to come back and join Chuck and me when we say Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava. And Alan always leaves me holding the bag when I say, doesn't cost you anything to give us a thumbs up. Give us a like, share. Folks, we're not doing that and cashing those big YouTube paychecks. We're in this for Ukraine, so spread the word so we can spread the truth. But thanks, Alan. Great show. I always appreciate being on with you, brother.
Thank you. By the way, I hear there's a football game on Sunday.
Yeah, I heard that. We'll see. And I am in a place where most people don't really care, but I do. I'm going to make some nachos.
We'll see you next week, Chuck. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alan.
Good night.
Good night.